Hello, my name's Jeff. You may have seen me elsewhere on YouTube, and in that persona I am a singing instructor, and I hold live events and do all kinds of things like that revolved around singing. One of the other things that I am incredibly passionate about in my life is rock climbing. I've been a rock climber for a long time now, going back to 1998 of all things. And in all that time, I've always been either a member of rock climbing gyms, or I've been out in Yosemite, or Red Rocks, Nevada, or Bishop, California, all these places where it's really easy to find incredibly high quality outdoor climbing. And as I'm doing more and more things that revolve around my home, I wanted to have a readily available source of climbing that I could use regularly throughout my week, so I could cut down on travel times and things like that in and around the Northern California area. So I've decided, after some evaluations, to build a moon board. And we are going to jump into the process here. I have ordered my holds from Moon Climbing. I have procured my T-nuts. I have yet to buy bolts and the hardware for the moon board. And I bought my lumber, which I'm going to show you in just a minute here. In truth, I feel like most of the big lifting, the heavy lifting, has actually already been done, and that's in the planning of how to construct this moon board. I wanted my structure to fit more or less seamlessly into my existing backyard, which you'll see in a moment, and there's a deck out there. And I wanted to not do anything more than I had to with the deck, but of course I want the structure to be safe and sturdy and all those different things. So I'm going to walk you through all the different things that I did for the moon board. I'm going to show you some of the modifications I made on it so that I could keep the overall height a little bit lower to hopefully keep my neighbors happy so that nobody gets upset with this monstrosity floating in my back garden. And I'll show you my plans here in just a moment that, as I said before, I think are the vast majority of the heavy lifting. As they say, measure twice, cut once. Well, this was like measure 300 times, and I haven't even started cutting yet. So here we go. Suffice to say, this is not being shot all in one day. This has been a long process, and the video archival that this is the culmination of it. So you're going to get to see how all of the planning gets implemented in the actual physical construction of the moon board. Right, so as I mentioned, I've got some plans here to show you, all scrolled up like a proper draftsman would. And what you'll see here, if you can see it all, it's a little bit faint with the light here. Get a little closer. All of my sort of thoughts and calculations on how I wanted to build this thing. One of the things I want to do to keep the overall height lower is I'm going to reduce by about half the kickboard. So the kickboard is a vertical section of the moon board at the very base. The plans call for a 37 centimeter kickboard, which roughly is a little over a foot. It's like 16 inches, give or take. And I'm going to reduce mine to 8 inches in height. This will give me, well, quite frankly, it's going to be 8 or 10 inches. I haven't quite decided yet. We're going to decide that later on, and I'm going to have to redo my mathematics to make sure that I have all of my support structure accurately sussed out before I start cutting things. But yeah, 8 to 10 inches. The reason why I'm vacillating on the 8 or 10 is because with 8, I feel like I can really only get one row of foot jibs on it. With 10 inches, I might be able to get 2 rather closely spaced rows. And the actual designs call for, like I said, a 37 centimeter tall kickboard with the jibs, the foot jibs placed 10 centimeters apart in 2 rows of 5 across the base of it. So we'll see how this all pans out. Okay, so what we have here is the lumber minus one 4x8, which is over behind the camera, that I've got laid out and ready to start mapping out the grid for all of the handholds on the 12-foot long climbing surface. Here at my feet you have 4 2x6s. These are actually going to form a base in a U-shaped pattern for the climbing frame to support on. The idea being I can anchor into these 2x6s and then anchor the 2x6s into the deck, trying to increase the overall structural support of it. These 4x8s are, of course, the climbing surface for the moonboard. One of these will get cut at 8 or 10 inches, the 8 or 10 inch section being the kickboard, the remainder of which I'm actually going to use to create a little side climbing surface for my daughters and myself and all that, so I can do some other problems and things like that that are just going to be on the side of it. Moving back, we've got 6 2x4s, 4 of which are going to make up the spine, 1 of which is going to be the cross beam at the top of the climbing surface, and 1 that I'm going to cut up into segments in order to go in between the 2x4 struts to offer more rigidity to the overall structure. And finally, underneath the 2x4s, that you can kind of see them glimpsing out, are 4 4x4 posts. I'm going to put 1 of which at the 9-foot mark of the climbing surface and another one at about the 6.5-foot mark on the climbing surface on the sides of it, again to offer more structural support and to take some of the weight of the moonboard off of that rear fulcrum that's at the location of the kickboard. So let's spin around here and get to work mapping out our grid of holds. So here we have a sheet of 4x8. I'm about to start mapping out the grid for the bolt holes. It's important to note on the moonboard that the holds start 20 centimeters from the left-hand edge of the board and 10 centimeters up. The way this works out is that you end up having 12 centimeters from the last row at the top edge to the sheet of 4x8, and you have the last row on the right-hand side, I think, has an additional 4 centimeters spacing between the last hold and the edge of the 4x8 sheet. I say all that to say that you have to have the orientation of the 4x8 correct. In other words, there's a left and right and an up and down to the orientation of it. And to help me with that, I put a little star in the bottom right-hand corner so I know exactly which way is left, right, up, and down. I'm going to map the grid out on this sheet and then use it as a template to drill through the 2 other sheets that will be affixed to the climbing frame. That saves me the time of having to map out the grid on 3 separate sheets of 4x8 because the grid is consistent through each section of the frame. And that's it. I'll give you a few more shots as I go here. I'm just going to really kind of go 10 centimeters up and then in 20 centimeter increments from left to right and do it all the way up this thing, getting all of my rows sorted out for the holds. I'll give you a shot, midway through or so. I've got my first line. It's so sunny out today, it's hard to see, I think. But if I get a little closer, you can just see. Got the first line going vertically up the face of the moonboard, and I've got the other one that's here horizontal. Interesting little thing here. You'll notice I've got 2 hashes as we get further down the line. They get pretty far apart, although when we get finally down to the end here. I realized as I got to the edge that the space on the right-hand side didn't look correct. It wasn't enough space. And I had done the original measurements by using a 20 centimeter length on my tape measure and just moving it along. Well, apparently I wasn't quite accurate enough each of those times that I was moving the tape measure from spot to spot to spot. And so those little incremental movements to the right of the frame just threw me off by quite a wide margin. So I just extended the tape measure out the whole way, and then you get the secondary hash marks, and everything worked out absolutely perfect. Did the same thing on the vertical first column and got it right on the very first try by using the extended length of the tape measure. Honestly, I'm not a carpenter. I rarely work with wood or do these things, and I'm sure this is like a totally noob mistake to make, and I'm totally okay with that. At least I got it right. Hence the old adage of measuring twice, cutting once, or in this case measuring like 500 times, because I've measured and thought through all this stuff. Hopefully enough times to get it right the first time. So, anyways, on to the rest of the grid. Okay, so, I'll be honest with you. I needed to learn the whole extend the tape measure thing yet again. Because I started going, I'll show you what I did here on the moon board. And you can see I've got X's marked out and all the lines drawn in, getting me across the moon board. And the thing was is that after a while, I started going off of some of the lower marks and then just using the straight edge to get up here. By the time I got to the 4th row up, I noticed that that wasn't exactly working out quite right. Now, if I had a T-square, that might be different. I don't have a T-square. And if you don't know what a T-square is, it's basically kind of like a yardstick, like this, except it has a big wooden block or metal block on this end, and what it is it creates a 90-degree angle between the block and this. So you could hook that T-square on the edge of the 4x8, assuming that it's straight, and that way you would get nice straight lines going up. Well, I don't have one of those, so I went back and double-checked my measurements on that 4th line and made some adjustments before I marked it in with the Sharpie. But suffice to say, I'll be going off of the last. I have 2 remaining lines to mark out the different spaces for the T-nuts, and then I'll have marked off my guide sheet, and I'll be ready to drill, which is pretty exciting, I have to admit. I will be checking over the mathematics on it one more time and just double-checking it against the plans as provided by Moonboard. But basically, that is pretty much the hold sheet marked out. Just finished mapping out the grid for all the T-nuts, and I have a big bag of T-nuts, 250 of them. As important, or more important, I have iced coffee. Delicious. T-nuts get pounded in from the back. You can see that a little bit out of there. Get pounded in from the back. And I got this 3/8 inch boring bit, or whatever it's called. It's not a boring bit. It's, you know, like to put a hole in things. It's not boring as in, oh, yawn. You get what I'm saying. Anyways, I was testing this out yesterday, and I got it stuck in a couple 2x6s making a chair. And so I bent it. So I don't feel like I can really use it for the actual moonboard construction. I'll have to go get another one of these. Luckily, they're not terribly expensive. But I wanted to test out to see if actually the 3/8 inch is really the right size. The M10 size nuts and bolts that go into this thing roughly correspond to 3/8 inch, so in theory it should work. So found a little 1x2 lying around. I'm going to drill through it and then see if this T-nut will pound into place and work appropriately. So let's check it out. Alright, here we go. Safety glasses, everybody. Gloves. I like to wear gloves. And here's our little scrap. Put it down. And it gets stuck again. The T-nut test did not go well. Yeah, that was not good. So we're gonna reconnoiter and get a new bit for that. In the meantime, having now marked up my sheet of 4x8, I've got it stacked here and C-clamped into position. So I'm going to show you what I've done with that. Really pretty basic here. I've got C-clamps in the 4 corners, and I've got it nice and synced up so that I can drill through this with a good amount of confidence that I'm going to get it all sorted out properly. We left off with the sheets of 4x8s lined up and ready to drill, and I'll show you that in a second. But the thing is that I used my old Bosch. Well, actually, I bought it like day before yesterday, and I've already ruined it. I don't know if you can see or not, but it's kind of not entirely at the right angle any longer. This is what happens when you use tools that you do not know how to use. I got it stuck and I was trying to torque it out, so I ruined it. Anyways, now that I've got more tools, I'm going to do another test run on a plank of wood to see if this is the right diameter of hole to bash in my T-nut. So I'm going to get some earplugs in and my safety goggles on, and then we're going to drill this thing and hammer a T-nut and see how we do. That is still not having the desired effect, because while the hole was supposed to be a ½ inch, it should be, I think, big enough for the T-nut. You can see it split my plank here. Okay, so trusty 2x6 tester, and there we have the T-nut, and I even got a little bolt here so I can show you. That worked out well. So apparently, well, 1 by whatever that is, too thin, is not really an adequate test bed for hammering a T-nut. What I will say though is this too, is that as I've realized, and again, noob here, so please learn from my mistakes. You've really got to get that T-nut hammered in quite flat to your surface, because you can see there, you know, it looks reasonably okay. I mean, for someone who doesn't usually work with wood, when you flip it over, you can quite easily see that the bolt is at a bit of an odd angle. So I'm going to have to be really, really careful pounding these T-nuts into the 4x8s. Okay, so I realized immediately after drilling the T-nut, or the hole for the T-nut, I did not have safety glasses on. Again, don't be like me. Let this be a lesson to you. These are all the things that you don't need to stumble over in your construction of your moon board. You can do it right and not make the same mistakes that I'm making. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed now, because I'm about to drill through 3 sheets of 4x8s with that ½ inch thing. And I don't know if I showed them to you or not, but here they are, marked out as accurately as I could. And I think reasonably well done. It's so bright, it's hard to see, but I will zoom in. You can see all the X's that are down there. What I've done is I've stacked them up and then secured the whole 3 sheets with these C-clamps. Now before I start drilling, I'm going to check one more time just to make sure that all the edges are lined up. And then I'm going to get to it. Over my shoulder. Let's start drilling. Oh, there's a bee right here. Gotta respect the bees. Gotta respect the bees. Let's see if I can... It's kind of moving sort of slow. I think he's okay. Yeah, he's just kind of hanging around. Okay. I've drilled the sheets. And of course, that means if you, my dear listener, watcher, are wondering the same thing I am wondering, which is, so, how many times did I drill through my deck? I'll show you right here. There's all the sawdust and stuff like that from the drilling. As far as I know, the bee has taken off. If you were concerned about him, or he, her, whichever it was, I'm not sure how that works out. But anyways, I avoided the bee as much as I possibly could. I believe I've drilled all the holes. Should be 66 holes. I'm going to sweep it off, and then we shall unveil to see what I have done to the deck. So give it a quick sweep. So far, so good. Now would be a good time to place your bets in the comments section as to how many times I drilled through the deck. It's my bolt wood that I abused, so I'm going to write my guess down on here and I'll show it to you after the fact. We'll see if I was right. There we go. Okay. I've written my number down. I guess I need to actually, that's a little bit premature. Whoa! Now that's interesting. Now that I did not anticipate. I actually didn't drill far enough. Very curious. So I'm going to have to finish those drillings off and then mark it. I guess, whoa! Watch out for that, kids. I guess, given the choice of drilling too far or drilling not far enough, I would take not far enough. Nice. I did not go deep enough a great many times, so I have to think about that a little bit and how I want to fix that. But shows you what I know. I wrote down 2. I thought I would have gone through this thing twice. I would say that the odds are pretty good that if I decide to lay this on top and drill again, I might go through it all quite a bit more. But let's try to, I'm going to try to avoid that, obviously. Alright, so we shall carry on. I don't think it's going to be a huge deal, fingers crossed. You know, the holes aren't exactly entirely perfectly straight through the 4x8 sheet. You know, sometimes as I look at them, I feel like there's a little bit of an angle to it, and I don't know how you would, you couldn't get a 4x8 shape. I mean, I don't know if they make drill presses that size, or if you have like a little like standalone drill press or something like that, like a jig or something, where it would let you get like a really, really perfect 90-degree angle through the sheet. You might think about picking one up. I think jigs are like 20 or 30 bucks on whatever, so that might be the thing to do. So, moving forward, you'd think that we'd be pounding T-nuts, sawdust, and we're going to get to that soon, but what I want to check out next is I need to make a decision on the kickboard, whether it's going to be 8 or 10 inches, kind of leaning towards 10 because I want that extra, extra row of foot pegs in there, but I'm not sure. I was originally going to go with 4 spines on the rear of the sheets of 4x8, but I started thinking about it and looking at it, and 80 centimeters of spacing is over 2.5 feet. Now, standard framing in a house is about 16 inches apart, I think. Even if it's more than that, it's certainly no less than 2 feet, or no greater than 2 feet. And so on a climbing surface, it's going to be at a 50-degree incline. I thought, man, more than 2 feet seems like a lot. So what I've done here is I couldn't really figure out the spacing to get it where I could avoid that gap in its entirety. And I'm going to do some bracing when I get the framework up. But what I've decided to do instead is to do, in fact, 5 spines along the rear of the frame, and I'll show you what that looks like here. I've got it marked up with heavy black lines so that you can see all the spacing, and I made a mental note to indicate the actual centimeters and inches, but it has evacuated my mind. Anyways, I've got them stacked up again, all 3 sheets, and what I did here too is, in order to keep myself all oriented, I labeled the rear of our sheet with the star reverse. So we know that we're looking at the back side of the sheet, and the side closest to me is the right-hand edge, and the side furthest away from me is the left-hand edge of the sheet as we measured it. The mystery is now over. It's going to be a 10-inch kickboard. I debated it for a while, but I think that at the very least, with 10 inches of space at the base of the moonboard, for some holds that are going to require my heel to drop when I'm placing my foot on the foot jib, I think that little bit of additional space might be very helpful. And I may even get like a staggered kind of row of foot jibs along the bottom there. So, let me show you what we've got. Here's our sheet of 4x8, and you can see I've got a line starting there, goes all the way to the far end, and that is going to be our kickboard. Here's the kickboard. I must say I'm very pleased with that. I was nervous about cutting something. I don't think I've ever cut anything this long, for this distance, and everything worked out really, really well. So I've got a nice clean top edge, and just about split the line the whole way down. Can't really complain about that. So, time to start getting an idea of where all the supports are going to go on the back of this. That then gives us the layout of the foot jibs, and that gives us the layout of the 4x4s, which pretty soon, that means cutting up a 4x4 to get the supports in the upright on the back of this, so I can get it nailed onto a 2x6, which is going to serve as a foundation underneath the whole thing. And then we're almost ready to start thinking about constructing the spine of this thing and putting the sheets of 4x8 on the spine. I'm pounding some T-nuts because, quite frankly, my neighbor is in the back garden, and you know, I was cutting some wood and I felt bad because it's loud. And I don't know about you, but the sound of buzz saws and miter saws, I'm not really a fan. And I didn't think he would be either. So I thought, okay, it's time to pound some T-nuts because I got to do it anyways, right? So I'm on sheet number 2, and I'm going to show you the kickboard, which is partially assembled in a few minutes once I get back out there. But for right now, I'm going to show you my T-nuts, and I got a real interesting tip for you. Again, along the theme of don't be like me. Of course, you got to pound the T-nuts in on the back of your sheet. So there's some. And if you take a real close look at a T-nut, here's my bag of T-nuts. There we go. You can see those spines there. Can I see that? Yeah. You can kind of see how they got those spikes. Yeah, it took me a whole sheet of T-nuts, so 66 holes of pounding. Oops, that's an uncomfortable close-up right there. Oh, that's even worse. There we go, that's better. Yeah, it took me a whole sheet of T-nuts of pounding before I realized that if I line up the spikes with the grain of the wood, they go in far easier and more completely, and they seat really, really nicely. So don't be like me. Line up the veins, the spikes on the T-nuts, and at least they go in smoother. I don't know if you're supposed to do that or not, quite frankly. So double check to make sure on your T-nut installation. But they go really smoothly into the plywood, and they seat really, really nicely and evenly. So yeah, we're just carrying on. I'll show you the kickboard in just a minute. We've got the T-nuts installed, got it cut. I showed you the cut. And I actually now have it anchored to the deck, and I have the first of what are going to be 5 4x4 uprights in place, so you can see what I'm doing and my thoughts on this. We'll see how this all works out. You know, fingers crossed. It's all about a lot of anchor points and a few upright supports that are going to be along the climbing surface of the moon board. But see what we got here. So what you can see is a 2x6, and there's the kickboard face of it, right? Got a 2x6 with a 10-inch kickboard. Along the back here we have 4x4 posts spaced as evenly as I could make them along the back of the 2x6, and then the 4x4 anchored into that, and then of course I've anchored the kickboard into the 4x4. I have not provided an update for some time with regards to the climbing wall. The moon board, I should say. But I'm going to do that now. So, without further ado, you'll see that we have come quite a ways from just having the kickboard. We now have what's beginning to look like the frame. The most specific part of it, of course, is getting the angle right. So it's 40 degrees off vertical, or I guess a 50-degree incline, if you think of it that way. And I'd never used a protractor, the kind of which you use for this sort of a thing. I've only ever used like the plastic things that, you know, you just use on a sheet of graph paper or something like that. Anyways, the one here, I had it backwards. So I initially installed the first two spine pieces at what amounts to a 40-degree, or a 50-degree angle. So it was really, really steep. It just didn't look right. I thought about it for a while, did a little bit of thinking, and then realized I was using the protractor incorrectly. And we fixed it, which took a little bit of time. But in a lot of sense, the heavy lifting is done. I'm going to put 2 more vertical supports that are going to be closer. You can see that there's some brackets already mounted on the 2x6s. But those will probably end up moving a little bit further out. And I'm going to do 5 spines along the back, and I'm also going to use brackets from the cross beams to attach to the spines, so that we get just a lot of stability on the spines of the overall structure. Use 3/8 inch bolts. They ended up being just perfect. I'll show you one up close here. Just a right amount sticking through the 4x4 and 2x4, and that worked really, really nicely. And you can see the 2x4 cross beam, and I'll trim off the end when I get along to it. Things are pretty vertical. There's a little bit of warpage that occurred as the treated wood has dried in the California sun. Here's a wider view. I'll, of course, give you some more updates as things get going, but hopefully tomorrow is the day that we get the rest of the spines in place, get the 2 remaining upright supports and a cross beam in, and fix the 4x8 sheets in place and get ready to pull down. All I need now are holds. I think today is the day. I've just realized I always look left like that. I think today is the day. I'm actually updating you here on the spines, hanging the spines of this thing, because I guess this is one of those occasions where if you've bouldered, that's cool, that's one thing, but roped climbing comes in handy in the oddest of locations. So let me show you what I've done here, because you see, I haven't had the help of a lot of other people at all times. Like, people come by and give me a hand here and give me a hand there. Getting the cross beams in place was really, really helpful to other people. And now thinking about it, I probably could have rigged something up for that too. But here, what I've done is in order to get the spines hanged properly, I have rigged up a little pulley system that I can then tie off to the upright. And what this lets me do is it just means that I don't have to try to hold a 16-foot long 2x4 in place while I'm getting all the angles sorted out. Now, this is another one of those don't be like me moments. You can see that top cross beam is absolutely not straight at all, and I could probably try to lower it to fix it. And I might have to as I get further over to the left here. I guess maybe I need to consider doing that now. Anyway, I'm not sure how it got so high. I was probably holding it too high crossways, and then I didn't get it right. But in any case, you can see that that's not level. The lower crossbar is pretty bang on horizontal, which is great. And when I get the 2x4 cinched up to it, the angle is exactly right. It's 40 degrees off vertical, which is according to the specifications of the website. So we're basically in really, really good shape. Hello, here is your moon board update. I unfortunately could not get any footage of implementing what you're about to see. But suffice to say, it was mostly a lot of grunting and swearing, so you didn't really miss that much. But here it is. Oh yeah! The first 2 4x8 sheets are up on the board, and we've got 2 more to go. As luck would have it, there's so much extra space on the 2x4s on the spines here, that what I'm going to do is, in a similar fashion to the way that I rigged up the 2x4s to suspend them while I bolted them in place and got them affixed to the 2x4 cross beams, I'm going to suspend the 4x8 from up there in order to get it up off the deck and then swing it into place so that, basically you don't have myself and someone else standing on the top steps of a ladder trying to somehow get this thing on there. and risking life and limb. So, pretty good look at it here. You would be amazed at how much it shear, like the getting the 4x8s in place solidified everything to such an incredible degree. It all got incredibly stable once they went up. There's a look at the back side, the back with all of the T-nuts in place. My friend who was over very, very generously helping me out sort of casually said, you mind if I tack down the edges of those 2x4s onto the deck? And I said, go for it. That too helped a lot in stabilizing things. I'm going to show you the rigging for the final 4x8 sheet once I get it up. Alright, so today is the day. This is the morning. We're putting the final sheet up. I'm going to show you my rigging here because I wanted to make sure that it was going to stay as secure as possible while I was getting it up. So what we got 2 anchor points with 3/8 inch bolts fixed up there to the 2x4s. I had to use the 4x4 as a shim because I didn't have bolts that were short enough for just a 2x4. And then the ropes come down to the 4x8, which I've got fixed here with some locking beaners with bolts, and I actually did a dry run and it worked really well. I wish I would have just tacked it up then. But here we go, my lovely assistant. And this is it. This is the final sheet. Well, here it is. I finally finished the moon board. Stuck out all my fingers and toes, which, if you watch this video, you know is no small task. I have the original school holds as well as the sets A and B. I figured since I was bringing all this stuff to California anyway, I might as well, you know, go for it and get the whole thing built. Let me show you a little bit more about what's going on, and then I'm going to talk you through some of the adaptations I made to get this set up. Some things I figured out along the way, which if you're familiar with carpentry or woodworking, you probably won't worry about, but or you'll know already, but was new to me. So let me show you some things. So you'll see that it's on a sort of 2x6 platform. What this did was it allowed me to tack it down to the deck, so I wasn't reliant on being in one specific spot, like getting the upright supports in just one area. I couldn't ultimately get the top as clean as I wanted, but in the end that worked out okay because that little lip there will serve as a means by which to anchor things or hold on to if I'm working on something up top or just need a belay eventually, although I'm going to reinforce it before I belay anything off of there. Same thing on this side. You'll notice the 2x4s on the sides, on the outside of that sheet of 3/4 inch plywood. Those are actually so I could step up and climb up there and to put the rain tarp on. Now, one of the things I did do with the moon board is I did use a Thompson water seal. I put the water seal on before I put the holds on, just saying, something to think about. I was going to put sheeting on the top of it, and while I don't intend to change the setup very frequently, something to keep in mind is that if you're going to put sheets to try to have rain or anything like that come off the back of it, make sure that you can easily access the T-nuts that are behind it, because it's pretty easy to pop them out of the plywood after they've just been seated with a hammer. Now, having had the holds in there, they'll be much better seated, but I knocked at least 3 or 4 of them out there, and it would have been a nightmare if I had put the sheeting up first. And instead, I'm actually going to just use a tarp. Here in Northern California, it doesn't rain that frequently. When it does, it's pretty heavy, but I've got a pretty nice way of getting the tarp on there, and it actually kept the entire thing really, really dry. We had some light rain this weekend, and it was perfectly fine. Something which may be obvious if you've worked with wood in the past, which was not obvious to me, and I failed to learn several times on this, was I pre-drilled my holes when I was going to drill something or tack it up. But I didn't always get the screws started, and this was particularly tricky when we were hanging the sheets of 4x8. It would have made everything a lot easier if I pre-drilled the holes, but I didn't insert the screws and get them started. And had I gotten them started, we could have just literally swung it into place and zip, 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 and it'd have been that much easier to get the whole thing put up. It wasn't a huge deal, but it would make things that much easier if you were to do it that way. For those of you who are building these kickboards somewhere other than England, or where the metric system is used, I happen to be in the US, moon climbing doesn't sell all the hardware, all the bolts and T-nuts, and so I used 3/8 inch T-nuts and 3/8 inch cap-headed bolts to screw the holds in. According to Moon's website, some of the larger holds require longer bolts. Well, I got bolts according to Moon's website, but when we convert them here in the US, it's just an approximation. And I actually went to a specialty shop, which was amazing. That's Bolin in Berkeley, California. They were incredibly helpful, like astoundingly helpful. But at the end of the day, you're just making an approximation. Well, the 2-inch bolts that I had bought for the general holds worked on 95% of the holds, even the larger ones. And I only ended up using the 3-inch bolts a handful of times. So I had to go back and get more of the 2-inch bolts. Not a huge deal, but FYI, if you're building this and you're converting from metric to imperial, you may want to give that some consideration. You won't need as many of the longer bolts, in my experience, as it's indicated on the website. There's perhaps also something to do with the fact that here in, at least where I bought my lumber, I could not get exactly 3/4 inch plywood. It's 1/32 of an inch narrower than that. Not an appreciable difference really in terms of structural stability, but that may have also had an impact on the bolts going in through the holds and into the T-nuts. If you have any questions, or if you think that I can help in any way in terms of building your moon board, please don't hesitate to get in touch via the comments section. I'm very responsive and will happily lend to you whatever knowledge and information I have gleaned from this. But from someone who has an extremely limited amount of woodworking, I don't want to dignify what I did as carpentry, but carpentry skills. From a very limited amount of experience with that, this went up really, really well. It feels super sturdy. I've got my fingerboard on the left-hand side, which I think I showed you before. I've got the moon board here. The plywood here is going to be the sort of intermediate wall, which I'm going to work on a little bit this afternoon, but I didn't think was necessary to finish up the video. Thank you for watching. I hope that you decide to build your moon board, and there you go.